Hello, everybody. This is Teal at Joy Journey Insight. Today, I want to talk to you a little bit about a very specific book, and I'll talk a little bit more about why it was meaningful to me, and probably read a couple of passages out of it. But I want to kind of tell you sort of why I pulled this book out and what it sort of means to me. So I made a video recently about my daily practice. That came out of a question that someone asked me about, what is my daily practice? What do I do? What kinds of things do I do that help me ground and center, that help me focus, or that have, um, meaning to me in some way, and to give me that moment of connection to the joy, the magic, the sacred, however you want to think about sort of a daily practice. Some people's daily practice includes doing some yoga, 10 minutes of yoga. Some people, their daily practice includes 10 minutes of meditation. Both of these, of course, are grounding and centering practices. For some, it's writing in their journal. For other people, it's pulling a daily card. For some people, it's having making a dedicated time to doing some artwork. There's all different things that you can do that give you this sort of touchstone point throughout your day. And you can also do daily practice stuff, at multiple times during the day. So you could do something in the morning, you can do something at lunchtime, you can do something at dinner time, you can do something at bedtime, however you want to think about that. Like, I know someone who part of their daily practice is that they make sure that they get up every day and they check on when this is, so that they can see the sunrise, and they make sure that they know the time for when the sun sets. And they make sure that's part of their daily practice. They see the sunrise and the sunset every day. And so I was sort of talking through in that video about that practice. So in terms of, this video, the question was asking about my spiritual journey, right? And how I came to be a high priestess, and my experiences up to that point, and as a high priestess, throughout all that time, right? And so again, I'm not going to go into it in detail. I think I'll make a different video about that at some point. But at 14, this is when I got my first tarot deck. It's when I started exploring, New Age religions and Eastern religions, Hinduism, Buddhism, Confucianism. Those are the kind of things, but they were all called Eastern religions at the time. I'm reading, stuff by Shirley MacLaine and Casey. To give you context, I'm 51. I'll be 52 this year. So what I'm talking about, when I was 14, I'm talking, mid 80s. But around 16-ish, I started borrowing books from my uncle's girlfriend at the time. First I was borrowing New Age books, and at one point I ended up borrowing the book I'm going to talk about today. And I think one weekend I kind of almost vaguely remember that I was like house sitting for her, and I basically read the whole weekend. And I read this book and another book, and that kind of like set me off on my path. And eventually I would add in, as I was in my 40s, I would add in some Buddhist practices and other things like that. But this particular book was really pivotal to me. And so when people ask me, like, I want to learn more about witchcraft, or I want to learn more about Wicca, and yes, I know that witchcraft and Wicca are two separate things, but there's a lot of overlap. So the practice of magic can happen in any religion, or even for non-religious people. But for me, for me, in my experience, they've always been overlapped, and and so when people ask me about that, I'm like, if you want to know more, check out this book. This is called The Spiral Dance. The original book that I had actually had a spiral on it, and it was red. The cover was red. And it's by, I don't know if you can see it. I'm trying to make sure that you can see it in the light. So this is by Starhawk. It was originally published in 1979. Then she published it again in 89, and again in 1999. This is the 20th anniversary edition. And one of the reasons why I say, if you're going to get this book, get the 20th anniversary edition, because one of the things she did was she went back in the 10-year edition and said, here's how my practice has evolved, or here's how my thinking changing. Here's how my thinking has changed in the past 10 years about this concept or this theory. In the 20th anniversary edition, she did the same thing. Here are things that have changed for me. I like that because one of the things it shows, this is a Squeaker. One of the things that it shows me, right, and emphasizes the living evolving nature of our spiritual paths, right? And that they will change over time. And that is certainly reflected in my own practice. But this book and the other book is called, hang on, let me get that for you. The other book I think is a little bit more dated, and it's but it was still a really good book. And this was it's called Drawing Down the Moon by Margot Adler. Margot Adler was a journalist and a pagan, and kind of wrote, there's a lot of some history stuff in here. But then one of the things that was like really interesting to me too is how so many things in here about different groups in the neo-pagan community. So witches, druids, goddess worshippers, and other pagans in America today. And this is another one that's, I think, from the, where's my copyright date? Also 1979, the original, and then updated again in 86. So obviously the sources that I'm getting, right, were, written in the 70s and 80s. Remember, I'm reading these books in like 86, right? So this is like a brand new, with like the newer edition was out for that. So I read them like all in one weekend, and just because imagine there's probably not a whole lot of sleeping going on there, but it was just so moving to me. And part of it wasn't that it was like a new way of thinking, it was that I was getting a vocabulary to talk about things that I already was feeling and thinking. And it just resonated so deeply with me. He is now on top of my painting. I apologize if he's being distracting. It's a little bit difficult to do this with him flying around, but I don't want him to be in his cage all day. So anyway, so the spiral dance, it really shifted things for me. So in this, this there he is. When I was reading this book, it really challenged a couple of things. I grew up like many of us, I was raised in Christianity, and with concepts of God as a sort of like, a distant father figure way off in the sky, right? Who's rather judgmental, right? And so the spiral dance gave me ideas that deity could be both, could be multi-gendered, could be feminine, could be non-gender, multi-gendered, and not just masculine, and that the divine, or that even this concept of sort of magic was imbued in everything. There was energy in everything, so that sort of shifted things too. So the sacredness of the earth, in fact, the earth as Mother Earth, was just really, I think, just really resonated with me. I also want to say that we do know that a lot of people who are who feel disempowered or marginalized also can be drawn to practices like witchcraft, because it also makes you, gives you places where you can feel empowered. So for me, the inclusion of the goddess, as well as multi-gendered and non-gendered aspects of deity, has been an important part of my practice. I will say in the very first edition, she later talks about in the 10th and 20th anniversary edition sections. But in the first part, her focus was primarily on the goddess and the god. And as I said, for me, it was primarily the focus was on the goddess, realizing that, God could be a woman, if you will. I think that was a quote by Merlin Stone. I think God is a woman. And so for me, this was like really, really pivotal. And so I'm not going to read all of it to you, obviously. But she actually does. Let's see if I can see what she says in the very opening here. The spiral dance is a seed planted 20 years ago. This is in the 20th anniversary edition. Over the last 2 decades, the goddess movement has grown from many seeds, like a garden of long-lived flowers and healing herbs. It's a big garden. I've tended only one corner of it. But 20 years is long enough for perennials to come into full blossom and for fruit trees to mature. We can look back now and see the results of our planting, weeding, and tending. So remember, she wrote the first version in 1979. And so, in the 1989 introduction, I wrote extensively about my shift away from a polarized view of the world as a dance of female and male qualities and energies, and toward a much more complex and inclusive view of gender and energy. This shift continues to deepen as I grow older, and it is still the major change I would make in this book. And so, like she says, she's made those comments in the back. And her, the group that she is a part of or was a part of, like so deeply when she was writing this book, is Reclaiming. And Reclaiming is a collective group. And basically at this point, Reclaiming is a tradition within Wicca. And so for me, this was just really pivotal to actually even shaping some of my views on what Wicca and witchcraft are, and and on my own spirituality. And so that was really really an interesting thing. And I wanted to quote here from I think it's actually the first chapter. Yeah, chapter 1. At the end of the chapter, she says, Mother Goddess is reawakening, and we can begin to recover our primal birthright, the sheer intoxicating joy of being alive. We can open new eyes and see that there is nothing to be saved from, no struggle of life against the universe, no God outside the world to be feared and obeyed, only the goddess, the mother, the turning spiral that rolls us in and out of existence, whose winking eye is the pulse of being, birth, death, rebirth, whose laughter bubbles and courses through all things, and who was found only through love. Love of trees, of stones, of sky and clouds, of scented blossoms and thundering waves, of all that runs and flies and swims and crawls on her face, through love of ourselves, life dissolving, world creating, orgasmic love of each other, each of us unique and natural as a snowflake, each of us our own star, her child, her lover, her beloved, herself. So that was really powerful to me then. And as I've come back to it, I've also found a lot of beauty in that. And then I wanted to sort of talk about another concept that I think is just really, really important. And that is that to me ties in not just to my own practice, but also when we think about the wheel of the year, right? We are currently in winter and we are moving towards spring. And if you think about the wheel and that kind of sort of life, death, rebirth thing, winter is that time of death and rebirth. And depending on how you think about it, some people talk about, Samhain as the new year, November 1st being sort of the new year. Other people talk about when the light returns on Yule. And some people say that we're still in that dark time until we hit Imbolc. Imbolc is like the 1st or 2nd of February. And then other people focus on the spring equinox in March, so understand though that it's all about just sort of process. And in a sense, what we're looking at here is that each year we have something of an initiation. So when we think about New Year's resolutions, part of that is the letting go of the old year to make room for the new year. That's kind of an initiation in a more secular way, right? But an initiation is a symbolic death and rebirth, a rite of passage that transforms each person who experiences it. In the craft, it marks acceptance into a coven and a deep personal commitment to the goddess. It is a gift of power and love that coveners give each other, right? And death and birth are the theme of initiation. Death is the root of our deepest fears and the true face of the shadow. It is the terror behind vulnerability, the horror of annihilation that we fear our anger or our power will provoke. As in the myth, what pulls us to risk that confrontation is desire and longing for those split off parts of ourselves that lie on the other side of the abyss, which alone can complete us and free us to love. Because where there is no courage, there is no love. Love demands honesty, which is frightening, or it is only pretense. It demands vulnerability, or it is hollow. It engages our deepest power, or it lacks force. It brings us to confront sorrow, loss, and death. And so we learn the mystery. The feared shadow, the guardian of the threshold, is no other than the god who is named guardian of the gates as his aspect of death. Death is subsumed to life, and we learn the great mystery, not as a doctrine, not as a philosophy, but as an experience. There is no annihilation, right? Um, Initiation also means beginning. And what is begun is the process of confronting the guardian of the threshold. And so the idea is taking responsibility for your own feelings, taking responsibility for yourself, and knowing that the one who determines what your future is, and ultimately is you, right? An initiation is obviously the actual act of initiation within a coven or group is a little bit different. There's specific things that go into that. But when we begin our spiritual journey, or when we, you know, reach these threshold moments. And so I'm going to step away from the concept of initiation as something that happens within a group, and kind of think about initiation as these transitions in our life, right? We have these, excuse me, we have these threshold moments, or we call them turning points, where once that happens, you're now on a new path. Life is never the same again. And if you choose to follow a spiritual path, it's not necessarily an easy path, because it makes you be responsible, to, and to be honest with yourself, right? But for me, that is actually one of the things that's the most rewarding. There was a video I was watching earlier this week where someone was talking about, our daily practice as a living practice. And that really, when I was hearing that, I was like, yes, because this is what we talk about in our tradition and living tapestry tradition. Part of the reason why we chose the name living is the fact that spiritual practices, and even religions, should be a living thing. It should grow and evolve with the people who are doing those practices, who are, working in community with each other, or even individually, what they're doing. So it should look different, in 10 years and 20 years and 50 years. And so there's sort of a living piece that it's reflective of those who are actually, doing the work, right? And then, for us, the tapestry is also the fact that we are interconnected, with each other, and what we do affects, the larger collective, if you will. And whether what we do connects, affects our coven, what we do affects our tradition, what we do affects our family, what we do affects our town, what we do affects our country, what we do affects our world. And that's one way to sort of think about all these connecting pieces. But back to, these books, sometimes a book can be the thing that shifts your way of thinking about the world. Sometimes it's a person, a conversation that you have. Sometimes it can be literally a meme that you saw and you're like, I want to learn more about that. That really makes sense to me. Maybe it's a podcast you listened to, or video you watched. There's no specific way that this happens, right? And I think it's just sort of important to remember that we all have our own journeys that we're working on, and we're going through. But if you want to know the book that I would say probably changed my life more than any other book in the world, I would say it was The Spiral Dance by Starhawk. And I come back to this book every couple of years, and I always find something, new in it, because I'm coming to the book from a different place. So even though obviously it's still the same book, there's always something new for me. And you can also see, you can tell I was a college student for a long time. Like, so I also like underline stuff, and sometimes highlight stuff, and right. That was when I was reading to you earlier. I was reading from some stuff here. So, like, the values of reclaiming tradition stem from our understanding that the earth is alive and all of life is sacred and interconnected. We see the goddess as immanent in the earth cycles of birth, growth, death, decay, and regeneration. Our practice arises from a deep spiritual commitment to the earth, to healing, and to the linking of magic with political action. Each of us embodies the divine. We are an evolving and dynamic tradition. We know that everyone can do the life-changing, world-renewing work of magic, the art of changing consciousness with will. And so for me, right, this, I think, to really shape a lot of what would become, my own views. But of course, this is the foundation, the starting point. But I have read many, many books since. I have been involved with many, many different groups, and since I have learned a lot just in my own personal experiences and practices. And so I think my own journey is a really good example of this spiral, right? Of this evolving, growing, living nature of one's spiritual path. This has gone in all different kinds of directions. I think when I first started, I just thought I would just, talk for a couple of minutes about this book and how it shaped my journey. And I think I've kind of gone off in a couple of different places. But anyway, that is my story about why this is probably one of the books that has shaped my life. So well, it's 2024, and in 2024 I hope we all thrive. Blessed be everybody.